So Carmilla is a thing, and if you have no idea what I'm talking about, then let me just say that you are missing out. This wonderful little narrative managed to fit all of my favorite things into a special little corner of the internet. It's got a wonderful romance, a hint of danger, some mystery, fantasy, a bit of science fiction, and a heaping helping of campiness. Sprinkle a little bit of eldritch existential horror on top and you've got fun for the whole family. But despite being kind of niche, this web series, like so many before it, went viral. And before anyone really knew what was happening, this single camera vlog style narrative show went from a very endearing gothic mystery to a massively successful, internationally recognized and award-winning epic Lovecraftian fantasy. I love web series a lot, and the camp doesn't scare me away from them at all. I've already done an episode of This Is a Thing on the incredible cross-platform narrative of the Lizzie Bennet Diaries and how that show was adapted to the mediums. Media? And you should definitely go check out that episode I did and the web series itself. But in the wake of the success of the Lizzie Bennet Diaries, everyone wanted to try their hand at creating a vlog-style retelling of their favorite piece of literature. From Little Women to Anne of Green Gables, some Shakespeare, and even Peter Pan. Actually, this one was really good. And so I tried to keep track of what was out there. There are some really good ones, but I'm ashamed to say that I missed Carmilla completely. I didn't even discover its existence until the year 2022, almost a decade after it aired. But I'm glad that I'm now in the know, and I can safely say that this show has now consumed the entirety of my life! Everybody needs a good lesbian vampire romance to obsess over once in a while. And it's not just me. As I mentioned before, many people during the series' original airing and in the subsequent time after have become engrossed in the story of Laura and Carmilla. This is a truly unique show that still continues to grow in popularity. And that's because of its relationship to the source material, its place in the public eye, its queerness, and the fact that it was and still is a web-based story. And yeah, it's ridiculously cheesy, but that's part of what makes the show not just amazing, but truly unique. Now, keep in mind, I'm a philosopher and not a sociologist, nor do I identify as queer or trans, and yeah, I know the Kinsey scale is a thing, and like everyone, I shift a bit along that line, but I'm pretty heavily rooted on the hetero side. And so this video isn't meant to be an analysis of the sociological importance of the show, so much as it is an exploration of the series as a piece of art. And so today, I want to talk about Carmilla. Carmilla fits right into that sweet spot after the Lizzie Bennet Diaries, where everyone was scrambling to adapt literary works into compelling first-person vlog-style narratives. In this case, Carmilla was lifted from the 1872 Gothic fantasy story of the same name from Irish ghost story aficionado Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu. While more of a novella or short story than a novel proper, it details the story of a young woman and her short relationship with the mysterious Carmilla. The web series was written and created by the Canadian Jordan Hall. The show's budget was not particularly large, but was enough to realize Hall's vision, and in 2014, Carmilla premiered with Elise Bauman in the lead role of Laura and Natasha Negovanless as the titular Carmilla.
You must be Carmilla.
Must I be?
The show quickly became a massive success, prompting a second season. With a waiting fan base and the help of some corporate sponsors, everything about season 2 was bigger and better. The cast size increased, an elaborate set was selected, and the story was set to go well beyond the scope of the novella. And for those that couldn't wait to hear more about their favorite characters, there was a cross-platform narrative short story told on Twitter, as though the characters were tweeting their real-life experience between season 1 and 2, like a season 1.5. This culminated in a single episode Christmas special, which was both festive and cannibalistic. Very on brand for Carmilla. Season 2 premiered to much fanfare and managed to propel the series to further success. A third season was announced, and again the budget increased. This time a full set was constructed on a soundstage, which allowed for far more control, and some nice graphics and animations were added, which really boosted the show's polish. Before the final season was released, a surprise prequel series called Season 0 was released. The final season was released in sections, and in fall of 2016, the little web series that could came to an end, with its grand finale. Or did it? Hot on the heels of the show's completion came the announcement that Carmilla would get a full-length feature movie with all of its main cast returning. The Carmilla movie was released about a year later and had a limited release in theaters in Canada before being made available for fans to watch online. The film gave viewers an incredible narrative journey and a satisfying ending for the characters. Since then, no new Carmilla material has been announced, but there continue to be rumors thrown around about the possibility of a full-blown television series. In order to explain the massive growth and importance of the show, you're gonna need some context from the story. So in case you want to experience the adorableness for yourself, this is your spoiler warning.
All right then, buckle up, cream puff. We're gonna be in for a long night. Or Wednesday afternoon.
Season 1 introduces Laura Hollis as she begins a brand new chapter in her life by vlogging her move to Austria to attend Silas University. Laura, who is wound a bit tight, is coerced by her roommate Betty Spielsdorf into attending a Frosh Week party. The next morning, Laura wakes up, slightly hungover, only to find that her roommate has disappeared and the university has left a note saying that Betty chose to leave.
It is multiple choice.
In her stead, Laura is given a new roommate, the moody and rather alluring Carmilla, who apart from her attitude has a few other quirks, like a strange sleep schedule, a lack of personal space, and keeping blood in the refrigerator. You know, normal roommate stuff. Laura consults her residence advisors, Perry and LaFontaine, who also seem to be at a loss as to where Betty went and what to do with Carmilla. Laura thinks that Carmilla is kidnapping and drinking the blood of missing girls, so she and her friends scheme to find a way to confront Carmilla once and for all. Laura uses herself as bait in an ill-conceived plan that actually works. Carmilla then does admit to being a vampire, but not to kidnapping anyone on campus, and was actually not attempting to suck Laura's blood, but was legitimately flirting with her.
Well, if you weren't trying to eat me, then what were you trying to... Oh.
Carmilla then reveals her backstory, with Laura providing hilarious commentary in the form of a puppet show. It turns out Carmilla was raised from the dead by a woman she calls her mother some 300 years ago, and every few years it was her job to find and befriend a handful of young women and then hand them off to her mother. After she fell in love with one of the girls and could not save her, Carmilla began to sabotage her mother's plans without drawing too much attention to herself, which now includes actively trying to protect Laura. It turns out that Carmilla's mother is the dean of Silas University, and the girls are being sacrificed to an ancient eldritch angler fish god living under the theater building. Yes, you heard me correctly. Carmilla is afraid to openly defy her mother, but Laura won't let innocent people get hurt and rallies her friends to go and fight. Carmilla reluctantly follows and manages to defeat her mother and appears to die. But of course, she's already dead, so Laura and Carmilla reunite and seem to begin some kind of relationship. In season 1.5, Carmilla, Laura, Perry, and LaFontaine attempt to evade all manner of strange creatures and perils as they try to escape Silas University. In season 2, the four main characters return to Silas University and begin squatting in the dean's old house while dealing with the fact that the board of Silas has returned due to the absence of the dean. Laura is trying to help the student population cope with the constant calamities that seem to continue plaguing the university campus. Things like random sinkholes, giant psychotropic mushrooms, and...
Harpies? We have harpies?
Unfortunately, while she is so focused on this, Laura's relationship with Carmilla suffers for a few reasons. But when a former board member appears by the name of Cornelius Hans Albrecht Luchenbaron von Vordenberg, oh, that's a tongue twister, he offers to help Laura overthrow the current board members and get a hold of the Silas Charter. He seems like a great ally to have, but once he's instated as the chair of the board, he proclaims that all vampires should be detained and attempts to kill Carmilla. Something about her maybe having murdered a bunch of his ancestors or something. So in a last-ditch effort to save Carmilla, Laura destroys the Charter of Silas, vanquishing Vordenberg, but also breaking the seals that were keeping the former dean from wreaking havoc on the world, because it turns out that Carmilla's mother is not dead, but had taken possession of Perry's body. Season 0 sees Laura, Carmilla, and LaFontaine taking refuge in the library and stumbling upon a set of old tapes from the year before Laura came to Silas University, where they watch some familiar faces get locked in a room and the usual hijinks ensue. I'm sorry, but this season was the weakest in my opinion. Laura and Carmilla are barely on screen together, and the whole reason I came here was to watch the two of them throw ever more desperate doomy eyes at each other.
No desperate kissing or lusty sexual undertones. No awkwardness, just good old-fashioned platonic buddies.
Season 3 sees our heroes still hiding away in the library, which it turns out is sentient and extra-dimensional, meaning that the dean in Perry's body has no way of breaking through the library's defenses. Carmilla and LaFontaine are dead set on trying to find a way to defeat the dean and bring Perry back, but Laura is mostly feeling defeated, as everything she had done last season led to only more calamity for her and her friends, including the unshackling of the dean, her breakup with Carmilla, the murder of Carmilla's sister, one of her friends turning into a vampire, just to name a few. Over the course of a few months, Laura begins to trust herself again, but with the understanding that she needs to think before she acts. We also find out that the dean is not just a super powerful vampire, but an ancient god. But there is good news. She can be trapped with 4 talismans. As the trio work to discover and locate these objects, Laura and Carmilla also begin to reconcile, first becoming friends again before slowly realizing they want to be together. The only thing in their way is the possible end of the world as the evil god dean begins opening literal gates to hell. Shit goes sideways, as it always does, and Laura chooses to give up her heart freely in order to redeem the dean, which works, and Perry is restored to normal. Carmilla is heartbroken at now being left alone to live forever without her love, so she makes a deal with another death god, as you do, and wins Laura's life back while also being given her own mortality, and the two then walk off to do whatever they want with their whole lives. Until the movie, which takes place 5 years later and finds Laura feeling a bit put out as her career doesn't seem to be going anywhere. Carmilla is content to live off the wealth she accrued during her immortal life, and the two of them seem mostly happy together until Laura starts experiencing dreams of a young woman and Carmilla begins to suffer from distinctly vampiric symptoms. The pair team up with their old friends and head back to Austria to find the ghost of Carmilla's first love and attempt to free themselves of the past once and for all. And, resolve some personal issues and get to play dress up in some old-timey costumes, which is awesome. Eventually our heroes exorcise the ghosts and return home where we leave them, at least for now. So that was a lot of shit to cover, and I only skimmed over the important stuff. Seriously, how do you get that much material out of one little novella? Well, to put it simply, you don't. You see, while Carmilla did follow the trend of adapting classic literature into a web series, it's also very different from a lot of its peers. Most of the web series of the time were concerned with recreating the story with a certain degree of accuracy, but of course in modern times. There were exceptions to this, with the Lizzie Bennet diaries in particular being famous for its treatment of what we might call the problem of Lydia, or as I referred to it, vilification of one Lydia Bennet! And if you want to hear more about that, definitely go check out that episode I did. But in the end, the outcome of the narrative was effectively the same as the book, and the themes were unaltered. Carmilla, on the other hand, is not a show that is concerned with accuracy. The original novella focuses on a young woman named Laura, whose father unexpectedly becomes the host to a somewhat sickly but very pretty young woman. This girl calls herself Carmilla, and Laura is immediately drawn to her, and all is well except for Camilla's strange habits of sleeping late, keeping her past vague, and when no one is around, she is physically affectionate with Laura. Meanwhile, in nearby towns, young girls seem to be mysteriously falling ill and passing away as though afflicted by some sickness. As Carmilla and Laura become closer, Carmilla's actions become more pronounced, and there is some definite romantic and sexual tension. Eventually, Laura falls sick, and the doctor finds a spot on her lower neck, because it turns out that Carmilla's name is actually Mircalla Karnstein, and she's a vampire. And so the party decide to decapitate, immolate, and then huck her body unceremoniously into a river. Good times. And all of this is recounted to us in letter form by an older Laura some years later, having survived the ordeal. The web series really only takes the names and basic plot conceit of the novella. From the outset, it was pretty clear that this version of the story was going to do more than just adapt it. The series is more of a reimagining of the novella, and that's not a bad thing at all. I know there are purists out there who will poo-poo this decision, but I think that the creatives behind the web series were more concerned with keeping the themes of the novella rather than adhering strictly to the narrative, and in particular the relationship between Laura and Carmilla. In the original, the homosexual nature of Laura and Carmilla's relationship is not framed in a negative way. Despite Laura's inexperience and hesitation, Carmilla is actually incredibly sweet and endearing towards her. As long as you forget the whole drinking the blood of the innocent thing. The web series leans on this and redirects the narrative. The creatives reimagine Carmilla as more of an anti-hero, and I am here for it. The change benefits the themes of the novella, at least as far as their interpretation of it, and focuses heavily on the romance, and who can get mad at that? As the seasons progress, the narrative strays further and further from the novella, which again I think is a good thing as the creatives drew inspiration from it, but envisioned their own lore and universe to work within that. All of this reworking was done with the intention of creating a compelling story that supports the central relationship of Laura and Carmilla. Changing Carmilla from the villainess of the story is an excellent idea, otherwise we wind up with a homosexual relationship which could be read as an evil character leading the innocent astray. Perhaps they could have written Carmilla as a villain who's in love but winds up on the wrong side of that conflict, but I like that their relationship is framed as normal except for the fantastical elements rather than the homosexual ones. Throughout the show's run, the creative team show their appreciation and love for the novella, particularly in the movie, which could be seen as a direct sequel to the novella, but they are still firm in their assertion that this story is its own wonderful thing. Of course, Carmilla is not the only vampire story with sexual undertones, or overtones in some cases. Vampires in Western literature have traditionally been used as representations of sexuality, but Carmilla is unique in its depiction of a homosexual relationship, which is perhaps why it has never been as popular or even considered as prestigious as Dracula, despite being published a full quarter of a century before Stoker's novel. Don't get me wrong, Dracula is an incredible book, but I think part of the reason it overshadowed Carmilla is that while its villain can be seen as predatory and sexual, it's somehow okay because it's heterosexual, which is ironic. You'd think that a villain like Dracula would represent all the things that society at the time would see as depraved, but no, homosexuality was just too far. Laura does often feel disgusted or apprehensive about what Carmilla does, but it always feels like this might be an internalized fear of her own sexuality and homosexuality at large. But Carmilla herself is not really scary until the end. She's described with this unearthly beauty and is jovial to all she meets, whereas Dracula openly preys on young women and is monstrous in his appearance, so much so that he causes Jonathan Harker to shudder. So while Victorian England was repressing its sexuality, it was easier to push Carmilla away and embrace the phantasmagorical evil of Dracula over the delicate sweetness and haunting kisses of Carmilla. But as society as a whole has become more accepting of homosexuality, stories like this have become more popular, and Carmilla is now seen as a classic piece of literary art. And as we know, everybody and their grandmother wanted to adapt their favorite book into a web series. Carmilla is now read and studied regularly, and of course has been adapted into movies and TV shows of varying genres and languages. But the thing that draws people to it now was the same thing that kept it from being enjoyed by a wide readership in the past. While most versions keep this relationship central, the web series adaptation was particularly deliberate in how heavily it chose to lean on this relationship, because the show is, well... Ha! Gay! Exactly. Okay, maybe not exactly. The show is a lot more inclusive as it has more than just one homosexual relationship depicted. The biggest draw, at least in my opinion, is the love story between Carmilla and Laura, and over the course of the 4 seasons in a movie, we watch them grow together, because their relationship and characterization is rich and complex. So not only is this a story that happens to be about taking down an eldritch god, but it's also about 2 incredibly well-written and 3-dimensional characters experiencing the ups and downs of romance. This would be amazing for any narrative, but the fact that these characters are homosexual while maintaining this excellent writing is inspiring. The show also takes great pains to show us their individual feelings as well as how they are in a relationship together, and how there are aspects to both, from the good to the bad to the post-apocalyptic. It's not just a heartwarming romance, nor is it just a homosexual one, nor is it just a well-written one. It's all of these things put together. And this is coming from a dude who isn't queer at all. I'm just a sucker for a love story, so for me that's exactly what this is, and that means that others like me will definitely enjoy it. But for those who are queer in any respect, they got to see a relationship that was a reflection of themselves. Hopefully without all the dying, world-ending, and evil gods, though. Beyond the main pair, we also know that Danny is also into girls, as she and Laura had a kind of relationship early in the first season, and of course LaFontaine, who is non-binary or gender fluid.
It's less about the she and more about the they these days.
Which again helps give real-world people a representation of themselves in a narrative, which is amazing. And Carmilla never pulls its punches in regards to this representation. It doesn't save its romance, sexuality, or queerness for certain moments, or hide them in the background with secondary characters. I'm looking at you, Disney! So while you're watching a killer horror comedy about an unlikely group of heroes fighting off ancient demons, you're also watching the same characters be unashamed of who they are. The story isn't always focused on the problems that queer people come across, although they are there from time to time.
Like this nonsense where you won't even let me call you Susan anymore.
I don't want to be Susan anymore.
Well, that's too bad because she was my friend. I don't even know who you are anymore.
But the story spends a lot of its time balanced between these things and the gothic fantasy. And let's not forget about the excellent romance moments, and the results speak for themselves. Carmilla is stupidly popular, it just didn't hit the mainstream. It became one of those things where if you know, and you could share it with others who were privy. But make no mistake, this show was huge. It was just hanging out in its own little corner of the internet. The fact that this show was a web series and on the internet was really important for a few reasons. Carmilla's 4 seasons and movie have like over 100 million views collectively, and what's more important is that they're all free for anyone to watch on YouTube. In terms of accessibility, this was unprecedented, and it became a large reason why the show was such a success, especially for the queer community. This digital webisode format had a lot of good things going for it. First, the runtime of the show is only about 3 to 8 minutes. This allows for easily digestible material, and was comparable to what most vloggers were doing back then. In more recent times, we've seen the runtime of vlogs and web series increase, but back then this was a perfect little snippet of information. This also made it incredibly easy to keep audiences coming back for more. Seriously, I've seen a lot of web series and I have never come across a show that does cliffhangers quite as well as Carmilla, and that's in a large part due to how the segments were filmed in longer stints, but cut up into shorter episodes. I mean, it definitely worked on me. It also means that once the season has completed airing, binging is an incredibly easy and enticing way to watch, especially after the show gets its hooks into you. Episodes are fast, snappy, and chock full of content, so it's easy to watch just a handful, and then before you know it, 2 hours of your day are gone and you're about to start season 2. Secondly is the vlog type narrative. Characters speak directly to the camera, which gives audience members the feeling of really connecting with the characters. I think this is a very successful tool that made these early web series work so well. Laura becomes a central figure that audiences connect with because she seems like she's speaking directly to and with her audience. I can see why this method of storytelling doesn't get used in narrative media a lot, but I can also see the strong connections that audiences make with characters who interact with them in this way. We invest in them and their relationships because it appears that we are part of the conversation. The fact that audiences can comment and interact as a community only increases this engagement. I've spoken on this topic before when it comes to Let's Players, so you can check that out if you want more insight. But for Carmilla specifically, there's another reason why the web series format worked out so well, and that's because of how the internet forms communities. Carmilla spends a lot of its time focused on being super gay, and because it was on the internet, it found the exact audience that needed it and that it needed. For television, there's always a certain degree of production required in order to look professional, and that means studios are generally stingy with their money, particularly towards queer shows. Queer communities have been marginalized in media and in society. In modern times, these fringe communities have managed to find a place to belong and explore and connect online. These communities already existed and they were screaming for narratives that reflected their own experiences. The internet has been a huge tool to help young people connect, where they're able to come together, create their own narratives, and reflect on their identities. The show is both a response to the narrative wants of the community and is made for them to enjoy, while also benefiting from that community's fandom. This was so much the case for the series that when the movie was announced, there was so much hype that 30% of the movie's funding was made up by fans pre-buying tickets upon the project's announcement. That is incredible, and only possible because of the way that those characters exist in an online space and connected with those communities. Art is transgressive, and fringe communities have often created the most important artworks because of their view outside the mainstream, and I think Carmilla is this kind of art. It truly understood the importance of being a web series in how it connected with the communities that were already online, and it really resonated with people and brought them together in a new kind of community called fandom. Anyone who's on the internet should go and check out Carmilla for its great story, but I think the narrative is only one aspect of why Carmilla became a viral sensation. The growing acceptance and popularity of the original novella, the deliberate changes to the narrative to focus on a queer relationship, and the fact that the show was made by and for queer communities on the internet made it grow from a little production into an expansive saga about a group of goofy characters that overcame all the odds to defeat an ancient villain. While in the real world, the same thing happened, and the show overcame the odds to create a piece of pop culture that is undeniably queer and will be enjoyed for years to come. The show is so important for all the reasons Elise Bauman and Natasha Novovelis have both stated in their acceptance speeches. Representation matters. This is a story that people wanted to be told. They yearned for it, and I think they are so glad to call themselves fans of something that reflect a part of their identity. Whether that means they were LGBTQ+, or more like me and just a sucker for romance in all its forms. And that is why Carmilla might just be the coolest web series I have ever seen. Here are my stray thoughts. I did use the word queer to try and encompass the idea of more than just homosexuality, but if I misuse that word, then I'm deeply sorry. Like I said, I'm not a sociologist. I could definitely keep talking about the show. I have way more facts and quotes that I could have thrown in. Like, the show is 100% Canadian, that makes me even more proud of it. There's also a book adaptation of the first season, and yeah, it's just as campy as you think it is. Hey, thank you so much for watching that video. I had an awesome time discovering, watching, writing, and then editing this video. Carmilla is my new obsession, and I hope it's yours too. So you're definitely going to want to leave a like and subscribe, because there's lots more things that I'm totally obsessed with and decided to write about, so you should definitely check those out. It's all happening right here on Cinemasters Ultimate Timeline.